Mike Leck, and welcome to Adventures in Scale Modeling. Because they must operate at speeds in excess of 200 miles per hour, stock cars are precision machines of the highest complexity. These highly tuned and finely detailed cars of race car drivers such as Terry Labonte, Darrell Wortrup, and Richard Petty are among the finest on the NASCAR circuit today. In fact, Richard Petty's Pontiac is on display at the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of American History. Here in the garage area of the North Carolina Motor Speedway, we can see the fine attention and craftsmanship to the exterior beauty of these cars. We're going to duplicate this same look as we build a scale model of the Richard Petty STP Pontiac for our museum exhibit. Later on in today's show, we're going to have the opportunity to meet with Terry Labonte, race car driver for Budweiser. We're also going to speak with him to get some first-hand knowledge on exactly what it takes to handle these cars at such high speeds. But first, let's go to the museum and begin building our very own high-performance stock car. Even though we were at the racetrack for only a brief period of time, it only took a few seconds for us to feel the excitement and the emotion that is part of automobile racing. We're going to recreate that same atmosphere in scale here in our museum as we build the STP Richard Petty Pontiac. Frank Mitchell, our master model maker, is downstairs in the museum workshop. He's down there working on the car. We're going to go down and join him and see what new and interesting modeling tips and techniques we can pick up. Let's join him. Frank's down here in the basement of the museum, and he's over here working on a Petty car. Let's see what kind of progress he's made. Frank, how far have you gotten?
Hi, Mike. I'm getting ready to build the engine right now.
Well, why don't we just take all the small parts you have there, put them together, paint them, and put it in?
Well, because first of all, you have to get them to look like that, and you have to get them off of those big, complicated-looking sprues that come in the kits that have all these parts on them. I've kept a couple of parts here out so that you could see them. What I've done is clipped these off of the big sprue, and now I have to get those little pieces off because, as you can see, just the fan belt part needs to come off. So
I see.
What I use to do that is this 25-cent pair of nail clippers that you buy in any drugstore and you can replace whenever they get dull. And I'm going to let you do it to show you how
so
easy
I take
it is.
the nail clipper and what do I do from behind?
Yeah, just kind of slide that in there like that.
All right, and give it a chop and a little chop here.
And off it comes.
Comes right off. Do I do the other side now too?
Yeah, go ahead and do the other side.
I'll turn that around there. From behind again. Okay. What is this doing for me? Allowing me to get close? I'm really critically close here, I think.
Exactly, but that means also less sanding and less having to clean up.
Yeah, I see we have some marks here. Is there anything we can do there?
Yeah, what you do is I just use a plain old emery board, which you can buy at any drugstore and you can afford to throw them away. And just use that to clean up parts. Let me do one, and then I'm going to have you do one.
Okay.
What you do is just slide that in there like that.
That's coming clean.
That up. Why don't you do that side over there?
I'll give her a try, Frank. Yeah, it does seem to be working very nice. Wow. Okay. All right, what's our next step now?
Okay, the next step, of course, would be to go ahead and take a lot of the small parts off. But there's one exception. On some of the small parts, and you have to keep reading your instructions to realize which ones you're going to do, but I've saved one out that's a perfect example of this kind of thing. Here's the fan blade for the engine.
Okay.
Now, what we want to do here is we want to paint that fan blade, but if you think about it for a minute, how are you going to hold that fan blade if you've taken it off of here without...
Oh, that's interesting. You're right. How are you going to do that?
Well, the way you can do that is you want to clean that part up as much as possible, just like we did on the parts that we took off.
I see you picked up the modeling knife. What are we going to do with that?
Take up the modeling knife, and you can go along and clean up the edges of that part.
All right.
Just like that.
That's coming pretty clean.
And, of course, you can use the emery board if that's better for the part. You just use whatever is appropriate for that. Then you can hold on to that, and you take your brush. I won't bother to paint this. I just want to show you how it's done. But you can paint that part now, holding on to this.
Well, let me see. You know, my question here is, if I paint this just gingerly like this, how do I get paint down behind that part?
You don't.
What happens?
What you do is you paint this as much as possible, and then you set it aside and you let that dry completely. Now, you take that part and you take your fingernail clippers again, clip that part off, a couple of swipes with the emery board to clean that up. Then you can hold this and take just the point of your brush, put a couple of drops of paint on there, you've closed up that spot,
we're finished.
And you've got a nice, completely painted part without having messed it up while you were doing it.
Now, Frank, I see you have the engine block over there. Is there any gluing before we paint here?
Yes, but let me interject here that I always like to paint things as disassembled as possible.
Now, is there a reason for this?
The reason for that is if you think about it for a minute, on any machine, it doesn't have to be a car, if you take two parts,
yes,
and they're painted or machined or whatever's done to them in real life, and you put those together, you bolt them together, there's a seam there, isn't there?
Yes, there is.
All right. If you glue those parts together and then you paint, almost invariably that seam is going to disappear and it doesn't look real.
I understand.
And you can
yes,
paint, but it always never quite looks right. So what you want to do is paint things separately as much as possible.
That's a very, very important tip we want to pick up from Frank here today, because when those two parts go together, we do not want to cover that seam line up. Sometimes we do, in some cases we don't, and that's what we learned here today with Frank. Frank, why don't we go ahead and glue some things?
There are a couple of parts that we can assemble here before we glue, and this is a good example. Here's the engine block and transmission that I've pulled out. I know you know how to glue these things, so why don't I hand that to you and let you glue that together?
All right, I'll give it a try. I'll take my ruling pen here and dip it in the glue. Can you?
Well, let's try something a little different. For a lot of people I know use ruling pens, and they get along fine with them. I prefer, when I do my gluing, to use a paintbrush. Just
fine tip
ordinary
paintbrush.
fine tip paintbrush here, and I find it gives me a little better control. Why don't you try it as an experiment?
Hey, I'm willing to try it. If you're the expert, I get to learn something here.
Okay, just dip it in like you would into a paint bottle. Now, just touch that brush to the top of that seam.
Okay, I did that.
And do it several places down the thing. And what happens is that the capillary action just pulls that glue right along the seam and closes it up for you. And just hold it together there.
Okay, and I just
with your
push my fingers together
right,
with it?
Just hold it together there for a couple of seconds.
All right.
Then you can put that aside and just let that dry.
Okay. All right, Frank, well, what kind of painting technique is next?
Well, the thing is that you don't want to assemble things any more than you absolutely have to.
Is there a reason for this?
The reason you don't is because if you look at an automobile engine or any piece of machinery, you'll see there are seams where things are bolted together.
That's correct, yes.
All right? If you glue all these pieces together and then you paint them and try to paint them in different colors or just paint them all in one color for that matter, those seams tend to disappear. While if you take the small parts, paint them disassembled,
yes,
then you glue them together, those seams remain there and it looks much more realistic. Now it looks like an assembly of a number of parts rather than one big piece.
No, that's a very important tip we want to keep in mind. If we paint our parts separately, we can really show the real thing, because when the real thing goes together, there's a seam line. If we put those two parts together first, then paint it, the seam line disappears. And we're trying to recreate reality here, aren't we, Frank?
Exactly. That's the point for doing that.
All right, Frank, with that tip, let's start painting.
No, let's do one other thing first. Let's go over here and wash your hands first.
Well, how important is washing our hands at this point?
Washing your hands is important, and you want to continue to do it not only now, but throughout the painting process. I think a good time to do it is every time you change colors, you wash your hands. The reason for this is that the skin is constantly putting out oils. These oils can get on the part that you're holding because you're trying to paint it, and that oil can cause a problem with the paint adhering.
So it could really ruin our job.
It can ruin the job that you're trying to solve here. So what you do is try to continually wash your hands so that to keep those oils away from the parts that you're working on.
Okay, well, Frank, now that both of our hands are now clean, can we start some painting? I have some bottles of paint out here.
Now you can start some painting.
Okay, well, Frank, how do you know what colors to paint anything here?
One nice thing about most modern kits is that the instruction sheets have very nice directions. You'll see here on this one that it calls out the numbers that these parts are supposed to be painted, and it's usually keyed to a chart on the instruction sheet. Also, another good source of information is the top of the kit box. You will notice that these things are colored, and they work very hard at the companies to make sure these colors are accurate, because just for that reason, so that you can, in fact, if you match the colors that are on the box, you're going to come pretty close to what the real machine is, whether it's a car, an airplane, or what it might be.
Okay, well, Frank, I'm ready to do some painting. What do we do next?
All right, the first thing you want to do is to pick up those pieces.
Okay.
You get your paint out here.
All right.
Open it up.
Now, do I use this right out of the jar?
For small parts, you can use it right out of the jar. Later on, we'll get into some areas. When you get onto large areas, I don't like to use it right out of the jar. And the reason I don't like to do that is because it's too thick, and it tends to make the brush marks appear more. It also is easier to run, and it tends to block out detail and cover up detail.
Well, I'm going to dip this in here now.
Right.
And do I do something like
always try to pull that against the side there so that you can pull off the excess paint. And now just try to keep smooth, even strokes as you're putting on that paint. That's it.
All right, this is great. This is really going on nice.
Now, in this particular case, you can see that because the color of the plastic is blue and the engine is supposed to be blue according to our instruction sheet, it sometimes is a little hard to see exactly how well you're doing as far as coloring the piece. But if you let that dry, it will take care of itself.
Well, Frank, why don't you set that over there to dry, and as you continue to paint and construct our petty car, why don't we take a trip to the racetrack and visit with race car driver Terry Labonte? We're back here at the North Carolina Motor Speedway on the infield section of the track. And with us is Terry Labonte, race car driver for Budweiser and the Junior Johnson Racing Team. He's going to talk to us a little bit about NASCAR racing. Terry, welcome to Adventures in Scale Modeling.
Thank you, Mike.
Terry, these cars going around here at tremendous speeds. How do you handle that speed? How do you become a safe NASCAR driver?
Well, the cars really, they handle awful good. That's what we really work at the most, is try to get the cars to drive just as well as we can. And that's achieved in several different ways. There's a lot of different things that we can try on our setups to make our cars really work that well.
Now, how do the cars achieve this speed? What's in them that makes them go that fast?
Well, these cars aren't built like the cars that we drive on the highway. These cars are specially built for racing along strict NASCAR guidelines. The only thing that's similar to these cars in your passenger car is the body style. They appear stock, but they're not.
Now, there's a lot of noise going on here. How do you communicate with your pit crew?
Well, during the race, we have radios, and we can talk to the crew and decide what maybe we're going to do on our next pit stop, maybe plan some strategy for later in the race.
Now, what is the most important thing you've got to think about when you're out there on the racetrack?
Well, I guess just constantly you've got to concentrate on running every lap the same, just running as hard as you can, every lap the same. And then also you've got to keep in your mind what you need to do to your race car to make it better for later in the race.
So you repeat a lot of things so that you get the feel of the track?
Well, what you do is when you're out there racing, you'll find you really a good place to run, or the best place you can. A lot of times you might have to move your groove or something, look for a different place to run on the track, and then a lot of times you'll have to figure out maybe what you need to try on the next pit stop to make your car a little bit better.
Is race